Approximately 30,000 Australians died on active service in World War II. Most died as a result of injuries sustained during fighting, while others died of disease and accidents. For an unlucky few, their fate was to be murdered during wartime. Warwick Sidney Meale was just another fresh-faced young soldier when he enlisted in the army on the 5th of January 1942. Warwick was born on the 9th of November 1923, making him barely 18 when he left the life of a sales assistant in Sydney behind for service life. Warwick was described as quiet, inoffensive, and was well liked by his comrades. Nicknamed Jazza, he spent some time in New Guinea in signals and the 5th Australian Line Section. In 1944 he was stationed in Townsville, Queensland. Warwick spent some time with his family in Earlwood on leave in early August of 1944 and returned to Townsville on the 13th of August. Warwick and his mates, Clyde Newman, aged 21, and Thomas Joseph Ambler, aged 20, spent some time drinking in various hotels and cafes in Townsville in the late afternoon of the 15th of August 1944. Warwick and Clyde had only met each other the day before. Ambler had known Warwick since March of 1944. During this time they met an American serviceman named Roy, who joined their group, sharing a bottle of wine. The men rested on the banks of the Ross River before a dance they intended to attend. Warwick went to the hall but decided he would not dance and sat outside. The four men went back to the banks of Ross River and at about 10 p.m. decided they'd return to the dance. Warwick wanted to have a sleep in the darkness next to Ross Creek instead. After that, Warwick was left by his mates. They went back to the dance in a hall about 100 yards away. His mates said they would come back after the dance to meet him in time for them to catch a train back to camp. He was seen laying on the grass here, a few yards from a merry-go-round and entertainment park, just south of Victoria Bridge, and near the rear of Edwards Engineering Workshop on Hanron Street. About a half an hour later, Roy left the dance, and Warwick's friends went to check on him. Just before they reached him, a man, who may have been a sailor or a civilian, walked past them and said, "Leave him alone, mates, he's only sleeping it off," as he walked by and off to Flinders Street. When they returned and spoke to Warwick, they got no reply. He was breathing heavily, and thinking he was simply fast asleep, they departed again. They thought his head looked wet in the dim light, but thought little of it. The others returned to the hall. Ambler noticed he had some blood smudged on his fingers, but unable to think where it came from, ignored it. Nobody saw anything suspicious, nor heard any arguments or cries during the night. But at about 9:30 p.m. it is thought that somebody attacked the 20-year-old soldier with a type of blacksmith's tool called a hot set, a type of chisel-headed hammer, and possibly with a pair of bolt cutters. He had been struck savagely on both sides of the head and in the mouth. Both implements were taken from an unlocked shed at the engineering workshop. The bolt cutters and hot set were found the next day in the tidal flat of the creek, near where Warwick was found. Meale's army mates escorted some service women from the hall to a bus after the dance concluded, and then went to fetch Warwick. They arrived about 11:10 p.m, and when their cries of "Wake up, Jazza" failed to rouse him, they tried to raise him up and struck a match to discover blood on his head and face. While Ambler waited with Warwick's head resting on his lap, Newman ran off to get help and was directed by a policeman to the Provost office in Flinders Street. An Australian corporal named John Colquhoun and two American MPs drove a jeep down, and Warwick was taken to a military hospital with a fractured skull. Warwick died without regaining consciousness in the hospital at 8:45 a.m. on the morning of the 17th of August. For some reason never adequately explained, Colquhoun did not report the assault on Private Meale to the civilian police until 9 a.m. the following morning. Colquhoun helped in the search of the riverbank the next day and located a human tooth. Police found bloodstains on a fence going towards Cameron Street. Police began questioning possible witnesses. Eventually, they would interview over 750 people, including soldiers in camps around Townsville, as well as crews of ships in the harbour and civilians. The area where the murder occurred was near the centre of Townsville, and a large number of people passed over the Victoria Bridge, both into and out of the city. Yet nobody saw anything untoward, and the police investigation got nowhere fast. Not only had nobody seen anything, the police could not come up with any motive for why anyone would have wished to harm Warwick, unless it was a completely random attack. Robbery was ruled out, as his watch, cash and other personal possessions had not been taken. After 10 days of investigation, police were speculating that either a sadist or a soldier suffering post-traumatic stress disorder may have been responsible. A possible lead came from an Australian corporal named Walter Thurecht, who said that a drunken sailor who was worked up in a bad temper had asked him to help him fight some Yanks, kicking up a fuss under the bridge at about 9:30 p.m. Thurecht advised the sailor to forget it and walked away. As he did so, he noticed 2 Americans walking from the direction of Victoria Bridge. The sailor, described as a big bloke with fair hair, was never traced by police. The war came to an end, and the murder of Warwick Meale eventually became a forgotten footnote to the events which had convulsed Australia and the world. Clyde Newman died in 1979, aged 56, and Thomas Ambler in 1987, aged 64. The story of Warwick Meale was revived by one of his cousins, Jonathan Butler, who published a book on the topic in 2022 called The Boy in the Dress. The family had secretly believed that Warwick may have been gay and that this was the cause of his murder, and the reason that the crime was not pursued with more urgency by the military, but instead allowed to drift into the dark corners of history.